Okay, welcome to the British Motorcycling Group podcast. I'm Ian Richardson. So I'll be your host today. Today, I'm thrilled to have a special guest on board. His name is Richard. We're going to refer to him as Dick Schultz. And you're listening to probably the best motorcycling podcast in the world. So, Dick, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning for me.
Yes, morning for you. So I should point out to people that Dick's 8 hours behind us. So is in Pacific time in the US, and I'm in the UK. So it's Greenwich Mean Time at the moment. So we've just we've just fallen back out of British summertime. We've gone back an hour. So we're 8 hours apart. So it's very early for Dick. So thanks for coming on board. The podcast is really, as people have been listening to us, growing immensely. We've had lots of listeners and lots of feedback and lots of people telling us how much they've enjoyed listening to people and their adventures, and the fact that we have such a wide variety of people, and that's one of the reasons why Dick's here. So Dick's a retired solicitor and snowboarding ski instructor still in a ski resort near Lake Tahoe in California. And he's going to tell us all about his adventures on bikes and a little bit about what brought him to biking in the first place and a bit about his life. So welcome, and you just tell us what you want to tell us as you want.
Okay, sure. Well, my start in motorcycling, I think, was a bit unusual. Most people I know who were bike riders, their parents were riding bikes or they wanted to bike from when they were little children. I never did. I grew up in a non-motorcycling family, and I just had a vague idea that motorcycles are dangerous and never thought more about them than that. Then when I was 18 years old, I was a freshman in university. I was on my way out to play golf with two other fellows, and this was in Boston. And one of them rode together with me on the bus from the university to as close as we could get to the golf course, which was about 8 blocks away. So we walked the 8 blocks to the golf course, and we met up with the third guy there. Well, at the end of the round of golf, the third guy offered each of the two of us, a ride on his motorcycle back to the bus stop. Well, I had an instant feeling of fear, and I was about to say, "Oh no," when the other guy said, "Oh yes." And at that point, I didn't want to look like a wimp, so I didn't say anything. And then I figured, well, I guess 8 blocks will be okay. Well, 8 blocks was all it took, and I was hooked immediately. Not long after that, I have a cousin. Well, I still have the cousin, but he taught me to drive his Honda 50. And then after that, my dad said, well, he says, all right, you can have one. But he said, you have to promise to always wear a helmet. And those days, there were no helmet laws, and many people did not. But I readily agreed. My first motorcycle was a Lambretta 125cc scooter, and I had a helmet. Now, in those days, most helmets did not have face shields, and mine did not either. Well, I've certainly swallowed my share of bugs. But that was how I got started in it.
Fantastic. So many people, I mean, my father, the same. My father started with a Lambretta, and then a Capri scooter, which was another Italian make. So I think most people...
I think I've seen them. Yeah, I know the name.
Lots of people have heard of Lambretta and Vespa, but Capri...
Yeah, Vespa, I think, is the most popular.
I think so, yeah. So how did you progress from your Honda 50? I mean, did you always have a bike, or like many people, did you then have the life and the car and then get back into it? What happened there?
Well, it was sort of a mixture of all of that. I got that Lambretta scooter. I actually had it for 1 year, and I rode it all over Boston, all winter, fall, and spring long. And then at the end of the year, it developed some pretty serious mechanical issues with the transmission, which I think was a manufacturing defect from the start. But I sold it, and then for a couple of years, I was not on motorcycles. Then I got a Honda 160. And I was living in Chicago at the time, and I rode that bike all winter long, except for 1 week when the roads were too snowy and icy. But I lived I was in university there, and I lived about 2 miles from the school. So on winter days, I would ride the bike to school in the morning, and I'd go inside and sit down right on the radiator to warm up. But then I rode that bike from Chicago to San Diego, which is close to 2,000 miles. That was my first long motorcycle trip. And of course, it was on a very small bike. Now, in California at that time, there was a minimum 15 horsepower required to ride a motorcycle on a motorway, the freeway.
Yeah.
And in California, a police officer stops me and he just says, "How much power does that thing have?" And I said 16 horsepower, which is what the manual said. And he says, "Oh, well, okay."
Yeah.
And then he took off.
Doubtfully.
Yeah. It was during that time that California enacted its first motorcycle driver license law. Before then, throughout the USA, you didn't need a license to ride a motorcycle. You needed a car license, was all.
Right.
But then people thought, well, there should be a separate license for driving motorcycles. So California enacted the law. I went down to our local Department of Motor Vehicles office to take the test. The examiner had no idea what to do. He came out and stood on the sidewalk and he says, "Okay, ride your bike to the end of the block and turn around and come back," which I did. And he says, "Okay, you pass." And that was it. And that was how I got my motorcycle driver license.
Oh, that's amazing. And you know, I don't think it was that dissimilar here, really, back in the day, you know.
Oh, probably so, yeah.
Yeah, probably until the 1980s. It was like that. I think early 80s.
Yeah, this was let me think, about 1969 or 70 when we first got our motorcycle law.
Yeah, yeah. I think they had
So
a law, but it was a bit like that. I remember my dad telling me about the examiner saying, just drive to the end of the road and come back, and I'm going to step out in front of you and hold this clipboard up to see if you can do an emergency stop.
Well, it's quite different now. They have a much more sophisticated test now. But I took one of those tests because not too long after that, I was on active duty in the U.S. Air Force.
Right.
And I was the Air Force base I was stationed at enacted a rule that required any military person who wanted to ride their bike on the base had to get a base motorcycle permit. And this came about throughout the Air Force because there had been several accidents where young airmen had killed themselves on motorcycles. So I was the motorcycle safety officer for the base.
Right.
And with a couple of the enlisted men on staff, we came up with a motorcycle test that's not much different than what they do today. And of course, then having come up with it, I had to pass my own test in order to get my permit to ride on the base.
Fantastic. Yeah.
And I've had no other tests since then. However, a couple of times now I've taken more advanced level motorcycle courses that run for a day or two. And
Oh,
that's been a lot of fun and has helped me also to learn more advanced techniques of riding motorcycles.
that's very useful. And I think certainly people, I think all over the world, but I can only speak for myself. You know, the UK has very temperate climate and we don't have severe winters. Having said that, we just had snow for the first time in November that I can really remember.
Mm.
61. You know, it's come very.
Uh-huh.
But normally we've been lucky to have half an inch of snow a year, and it's one day a couple of millimeters, and it's gone by 10 a.m. So we don't really
Yeah.
have a lot. But people often don't ride during winter just for the fear of black ice and rain and cold. And then they come out after a 6 month hiatus and they're a bit rusty. And I think people don't understand that 6 months is quite a long time to get on and expect it to, your fine sort of instincts and skills to be there the same.
Oh, I agree completely. In fact, the same thing is true in the ski industry. The flip side, all summer you're not on skis. And when the season starts up again in the fall, they tell all of us, you've been away for 6 or 7 months, take it real easy for the first day or two to get back into it. Now for the weather, I live in the high mountains. And in a normal winter, the snow in my front yard will be about 15 feet, 5 meters deep. And of course, once the winter really starts, there's snow and ice on the roads all the time. And riding the motorcycle in those conditions, at least the type of bike I have, just wouldn't do. So the bike hibernates in the garage for about 5 months.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised at all. And I was going to ask you about that, Dick. The fact that you became so addicted to that motorcycle, that first ever ride on the back of your friend's bike, and you thought, wow, I guess that is the same type of wow that made you feel that the skiing world was that adrenaline? Is it linked?
Oh, I think it's very similar. Now, I first started skiing when my son was little, and he wanted to learn to ski. Well, the sensations of skiing and snowboarding are totally different, even though both of them are done in the snow. Well, it took me a while to get used to skiing, and I gradually got to like it. There was never any sudden moment where I felt addicted to it, but it got to be a lot of fun. And then one day I was curious to try the snowboard. I only wanted to try it once. But that was my instant addiction experience, just like with the motorcycle.
Oh,
All it took was one slide on the board, and I loved it. And then became a snowboarder. I think in some ways the sensations are kind of similar. And I also fly small airplanes. And I've read comments from other people who compare small airplanes to snowboarding and to motorcycling. And I think in all three of them, there are some similarities of movement that just, for those of us who love it, totally love it.
yeah, absolutely. Very interesting that because I think on a couple of weeks ago on a podcast, I was talking to someone who was talking about electric motorcycles and
Mhm.
how in the UK they're almost the hatred is just it's intense, and you're not amongst everyone, but of course there's this there's always a section of people that say if I can't smell it and hear it and feel those vibrations and I'm not interested, and I get that. I understand what they mean.
Oh,
um
yeah.
but although I wouldn't say I had those same those feelings to any extreme, I understood what they mean. But when my son was 16, he's 18 now, my youngest son. I bought him an electric motorcycle. And the reason I bought him it was because my wife said, I don't want him having a motorbike because they're dangerous. And so I says, well, I know, but I've got them and his older brother's got them. And she said, yeah, I know. And I don't want him on one.
Yep.
So, I understand mums are like that. And so sometimes, so I thought, right, how can I get round this? So I bought him um, an electric motorcycle that it wasn't a scooter, it looked like a motorcycle, like a small
Mhm.
zero,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
which had a about 45-mile range, and it was you could charge it overnight, 50 pence, 60 cents, I guess, overnight to charge it. His school was only 4 miles away, so 8 miles a day. He could charge it every 3 or 4 days, and
Mhm.
it did about well. The law here at 16 is that you can only ride a moped up to 49 cc, and it can't go above 30 miles an hour. So that bike was the electric version of a moped. It could only go up to, by law, for him at his age, 30 miles an hour.
Hmm.
So that's what it did. And the guy delivered it, my son was at school. So I thought, oh, I'm got to go out on it, obviously. So I put my helmet on and gloves, and his birthday's in June. It was nice and warm, and I just went off. And I thought, wow, I came back with a massive smile on my face. This thing only did 30 miles an hour. But what I felt was the feeling you just spoken about with flying and with snowboarding. You had this magical pushing. Actually, I likened it as well to sailing or
Hmm.
gliding. There was this feeling of movement without any noise. You could hear the birds and and I thought,
Hmm.
and the torque was absolutely immense for a little bike. I'd been used to a moped when I was 16. This thing, literally, if you didn't hold on, it was going to push you off.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
I was like, wow. So that changed my view. So when people slag off, as we say in England, electric bikes, I say, you know what? I think they've got a place alongside our petrol powered bikes. Let's see.
Yeah. Well, I think probably so. I mean, we we do have electric motorcycles in the USA. Excuse me. And I've never been on one. But personally, I do not like noisy motorcycles. For me, the quieter, the better. And the two bikes I have now both have the original equipment exhaust.
Right.
And they're both relatively quiet as motorcycles go, which is fine for me. So
Yeah.
the quieter, the better, I
So
think.
you're not a loud pipe save lives person.
Oh, no. In fact, Harley Davidson actually has a trademark on the distinctive sound that their motorcycles make,
Really?
which to me is a loud and very unpleasant noise.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of noise and not lots of power. Sorry if you've got that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, the electric motor torque characteristics, of course, are very different from a gasoline one because the electric motor will put out full torque at 0 RPM, which means you can get very powerful acceleration. And this is true of electric cars also.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, you step on the pedal at the start, it'll slam you back into your seat. It accelerates so fast.
Yeah. I think for around cities or for delivery riders or kids going to work or people, to school or college, great. And,
Oh,
no
yeah.
there and then. But of course, there's another story about the pollution produced when you make it up.
Uh,
We're not going to get into that.
yeah.
So passed your test, you were in the Air Force. I was going to say the RAF then, because that's RAF.
It wasn't the RAF, no.
You were in the USAF.
Yeah, that's right.
You were the motorcycle safety officer. You passed your own test. What happened then in relation to your sort of bike life and your, bikes that you bought or places? What were you said you'd ridden to California, which is an
Yeah.
immense journey.
Well, it certainly was back then. Well, my next motorcycle after the 160 was a Honda 450. And that one I had during most of my tour of Air Force duty. And then at the end of that, I rode it cross country from San Francisco all the way to Virginia. And that was a good fun ride.
I bet.
Then after that, my daughter arrived. And then my son arrived. And with small kids, the motorcycle wasn't very practical. And there wasn't a whole lot of excess money to pay for insurance. So with great reluctance, I sold it. And then it was some years later when the kids were almost grown up that I got back into motorcycling again with the Honda CB919, which is one of the ones that I have now. And when I first got on it, after quite a few years away from it, I was afraid of it. And it took me a little while to get comfortable riding it again, just around the neighborhood where I lived. And then there was an occasion to take it on the motorway. And I gulped and I figured, well, I guess I can do this, but I did. And of course, with no difficulty. So then I started riding it more and more different places. Just within California, I've ridden it on several of the twistiest, curviest roads we have. And then sometime along in there, Triumph came out with their Rocket 3. And I was intrigued by reading about it, the world's most powerful production bike, and plus which it's a really good looking machine, I think.
Yes.
And I went to a Triumph dealer and took a test ride on one. And I really liked it from the test ride. And then a few years later, I figured I wanted to get a bigger bike than the Honda. So again, I started looking around and found in Sacramento, near where I live now, a Triumph dealer that had one that was brand new, but 2 years old. They had never sold it. And I took a test ride on it and I really liked it. So I ended up getting that one.
Wow.
Well, for a while, I was just riding it around home. And then I figured, time for my first trip. So I figured I was going to go from where I live, sort of in the middle of California, up across the state line into the state of Oregon. I had a friend who lived up there. So I wanted to go not just up the motorway, which is kind of boring. So instead, I rode across the Central Valley into the coastal mountains. And there's a road, a highway, California Highway number 3, that looked from the map like a pretty nice curvy road. So I rode over there on that big bike. As soon as I got onto Highway 3, there was a barricade, road closed, detour due to construction. Well, the detour was onto a local road, but that road was perfectly fine for about a mile.
Right.
And then that one was closed too due to construction, detour. And this detour was onto a Forest Service sand and gravel road up through the trees for a couple of miles to return back to Highway 3.
Right.
Well, if I had known then what I know now, I would have made a U-turn. That big bike doesn't do very well on sand and gravel roads. But on my Honda, it wouldn't have been much of an issue. So I just started right up that road. I actually made it about 3/4 of the way. and then I lost it and over it went.
Oh
Well,
no.
it had crash bars front and back, so it didn't hurt the bike any. And fortunately, I managed to get my leg out of the way. It didn't hurt my leg any. And it was more embarrassing than anything else. But pretty soon, a couple of other people came by in cars and they helped me get it straight up again. Well, after that experience, I figured maybe I better learn a little bit more about riding heavy motorcycles. And so it was not long after that that I took the first of the more advanced level motorcycle courses I've taken and really got a better idea of what you can do with a big bike. And of course, with that one, at least you should not do, which is a lot of sand and gravel riding.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow. They are a beautiful bike though. They really are.
Oh,
Yeah.
I think they are. Yeah.
And I'm a Triumph fan. I've got a Triumph Thunderbird 900, which is a
Oh, all right.
beautiful. And it's, I always say to people, it's like new, but I hesitate saying that because the fact that it's like new means I don't ride it much. So people say, it's like you don't ride it enough. And I'm like, oh, well, I clean it a lot.
Well, mine still rides it like it was new, but it's certainly not new now. I mean, I've had it 8 years now, and I've been all over the USA and Canada on it, and it now has 115,000 miles on the odometer,
Wow.
which
That's,
the Triumph dealer thinks is pretty amazing.
it is. And you know, the fact that that engine is so much torque and so under stressed that
Yeah.
allows you to do that. I don't know if you've had any major mechanical issues with it, but that's
I've had none. The most expensive mechanical issue is I have to replace the tires about every 10,000 miles. But that's not the motorcycle's fault at
no,
all. I mean, just
no.
motorcycle tires wear out.
That's
But except for
amazing.
that, let's see, I had to put in a new battery a year or two ago, and that's about all. I mean, basically, nothing has really gone wrong with it.
Wow. You know that when you think about it, there won't be many bikes with that type of miles. I mean, cars do that miles, not those type of
Oh,
miles.
yeah. Well, no, I kind of realized that because when I was first shopping for mine, I looked some on eBay at used ones.
Mm.
And I was seeing ads for people who had had a Triumph Rocket 3 for 10 or 12 years and had put 8,000 miles on it. And I thought, well, my gosh, don't they ever ride it? And I guess many people, it's just occasionally riding around town is all they do.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, like I say, I've been all over the USA. I've ridden it in every state except Hawaii. Can't very well ride it to Hawaii. I have been motorcycling in Hawaii, but on a rented Harley over there.
Yeah.
And I've ridden it too in every one of Canadian provinces except the Northwest Territory.
Oh.
And what I'll sometimes say is the Northwest Territory doesn't count because there aren't any roads up there,
Yeah,
or at least not very many.
not many. That's astonishing, to be honest.
Yeah.
I bet. I wonder how many people have ridden in every state, or you know, that's
Yeah,
pretty.
I think there are a few. I've read an article just recently in the American Motorcyclist about one woman who did that. She's an iron butt rider, and I've never quite tried to do that.
No.
But she's an iron butt rider, and she was in a competition once where they had to ride in all of the lower 48 states, and she did that.
That's. I mean, I've never done anything like that. You know, I think massive kudos to people that can, I guess, one, have the courage, the time, the energy, the money, the opportunity, and just that. I guess you've got to. I always say this, but people talk about these things all the time, but not so many people do it. You've just got
Yeah,
to, you
yeah.
know, at what point do you say, I'm going to do it before it's too late? So that's amazing that you've done that. How many years did you do that over? Has that been something that you did like every year, every 6 months? How did it work?
Oh, on the Triumph Rocket 3, every summer when I was not working at the ski resort, going back 8 years now. So now this past summer, I didn't take any long trips on it because I did my first major overseas trips instead.
Right.
Yeah.
It's,
But in other years, it was at different times to every one of the lower 48 states, plus District of Columbia, and also at times with those states going through various of the Canadian provinces. I made one trip especially to Newfoundland, and that was my first time on a ferry boat with the motorcycle because
ah,
it's an overnight ferry boat ride, about 7 or 8 hours.
wow.
And so they have straps that you tie the motorcycle down so it won't tip over in case the boat rocks back and forth.
Yeah.
I've been on several ferry boats with it since then, including when I went to Alaska. Some people will ride their bike from the lower 48 to Alaska all the way through British Columbia.
Yes.
And I figured, well, that's going to be about 3 days of just riding through forest with nothing to see and probably kind of monotonous.
Mm.
So instead, I cheated. I took the ferry boat from Seattle up to Alaska. And of course, then when I got off, it was in Skagway, which is way down in the Alaska Panhandle, that little narrow strip that runs alongside British Columbia.
Yes.
And from Skagway, I rode across the mountains into the Yukon, to the town of Whitehorse, which I think is the only real city in the Yukon, and had great fun doing that. And then from there, it was on the Alaska Highway all the way up to Fairbanks.
And I bet, I mean, I've heard how beautiful it is and seen it on TV and things. Very, very unique scene.
Oh, it is spectacular up in Alaska. The mountains are incredible. And if you like hiking, as I do, I mean, there are thousands of trails of all different degrees of difficulty that you can go hiking on.
Wow.
And of course, other mountain activities too. Oh, it's a wonderful place.
I do. I love. I mean, we're very limited with our mountains in the UK,
Yep, yep.
But in fact, my son is actually hiking now. He's I can see photographs being sent to me by messenger as we speak. He's up there with his
Uh,
girlfriend. So but they're very limited. But I do love that, that the topography and looking and I just the one I remember most recently, just a few months ago in California, riding to Las Vegas and just on the high desert, and then you see the mountains start to rise, and even that,
oh,
for
yeah,
me, it's like wow, and you
yeah.
even imagine the scale till you get near it, and you think beautiful.
Yeah. Now, when you rode to Las Vegas, did you take the interstate that is the freeway?
Yes, I did, but I regretted it. Um,
Well, yeah, that road is kind of notorious for being extremely heavy traffic, and most of it is pretty much just straight away. Further north, the highway that's a lot more fun going across Nevada is US Highway 50. It's been described as the loneliest highway in the entire country.
really,
And it is. You go 40, 50 miles between any kind of a settlement. And if you plan a little bit ahead of time, you can get gasoline all right along the way.
yeah.
And that's going through, it's a lot of desert mountains, and the road has straight sections and also some curvy sections. That's a beautiful ride. So
Ah,
if you come back, I hope you'll consider trying that one.
I certainly will, because the routes I've always taken is either from LA or from San Diego further south.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, and then go west, go east
Hmm.
rather
Yeah.
than further north. I mean, I guess you're talking up sort of north of San Francisco, are you, to go that way?
Well, no, US Highway 50, well, I guess it is a little bit north of San Francisco. It actually starts just south of Reno, Nevada. And
Right.
that's a little bit north of San Francisco. And then it goes pretty much across the state of Nevada. It goes all the way to the East Coast, and it ends in the state of Maryland in the town of Ocean City, which is right on the Atlantic coast.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. So all those miles, have you done those all solo? Have you ever had a pillion, or how?
I've done just about all of them solo. Truth is, I prefer riding when I'm the only one on the bike. I mean, I've carried passengers quite a few times over short distances,
Yeah.
but for a long distance trip, first of all, I've got stuff to carry along that I strap onto the back seat.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I'm more comfortable riding by myself.
Yeah. Me too, actually. Yeah. And I was going to ask you about that. The reason I wanted to mention that was not just to ask if you took passengers, but um, about your luggage. Such journeys mean a lot, I guess, meticulous planning to a degree, or potential
Yeah.
preventative maintenance, and the luggage that's going to allow you to, survive in the different weathers. And how did you do that? And what happened with accommodation? Was that a variety of
Well,
different?
here's the way it worked out. The Triumph Rocket 3, the one I have is the touring model. That comes with panniers on the left and right side. And I also have a top cap on the back that I got a Gibby one.
Yeah.
So I can get quite a bit of stuff into those three. And then I've also got a pretty fair sized suitcase that's designed for motorcycles, and it straps on to the back support of the back seat. And that will hold quite a bit of stuff too. And between all of those, I can pretty much carry everything I need. Most of the time, I don't try to camp out because that's a lot more gear.
Yes.
And when you're traveling alone, at least in campgrounds, you always got to pay a campground fee. And I figured, well, the time I pay that and go all of that trouble, it's not much more to stay in a motel instead. So I often do that
No,
instead.
no, I like a comfy bed.
Yeah, well, I do too. I mean, I like camping out. I also like comfy beds. So it's yeah, on the trip to Alaska, it was very much a mixture. I was camping out part of the time, and in Alaska, 2 or 3 times, I found campgrounds that cater specifically to motorcycles,
Oh, wow.
which was really kind of cool. You know, they advertised motorcycle campground, and I figured, okay, I got to try that. And it was like other campgrounds, really, but it was a sort of a nice atmosphere.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, like-minded people and facilities specifically for motorcyclists. I guess
Yeah, yeah.
that's great. And I guess well, thank you as well. Thank you for riding a British bike. That's great.
Well, I sure do love that bike, and it's 8 years, and I haven't stopped yet.
No, that's amazing. Well, you know what they
Yeah.
say. I mean, I really am like that. When I put my bike in the garage, I do literally before I lock it up, I go and look again at it. I still look back at it. And they say,
Oh yeah, of
don't do
course.
that, you've got the wrong bike. But I honestly do. I'm like,
Oh yeah. Well, mine is in the garage. Well, the two of them, the Honda and the I have both,
right,
and they're both covered for the winter. But even so, about every month or so, I'll pull the cover off and give the batteries a charge,
yes.
so that I'm sure they'll be all ready as soon as the snow goes away in the springtime, and I can start riding again.
When does that happen, Dick? When does the snow tend to?
Usually the snow on the roads is pretty well gone by early to mid-April.
Oh, that's not too bad.
Yeah, we have a fairly long winter here. It usually starts around the middle of November, early November, which is exactly what happened this year. And most years, by the middle of April, the roads are perfectly rideable again.
Right, right. Yeah,
Oh,
that's
one year though, about middle of April, snow was all gone from the roads, and I rode my bike down to LA, which is about a 7 or 8 hour drive from here, to spend the weekend with my son down there. And then I came back. The weather in LA was lovely. The weather all the way up the valley to Sacramento was lovely. And the weather report from the town of Truckee, where I live on the other side of the mountains, was also clear.
nice.
So I start riding up, and halfway up, I ran into an ice storm.
Hmm.
And the ice was coming down in just about in sheets. It coated my windscreen on the bike, then it coated the windshield on my helmet. And so I was trying to ride without the helmet. Now, I was still wearing glasses in those days. My eyes have been fixed since then. So then the ice was coating my glasses. And it was to the point where I figured, I'm going to stop. I can't see anything. But just at that moment, I rode out of the storm.
Oh,
And then I made it the rest of the way. But at that point, I snapped a photo of my motorcycle, and the front of it is just covered with ice.
really
So that sort of thing can happen in the mountains up here.
amazing, amazing. I was thinking, I remember towards the end of May in Quebec, it's still being
Mhm.
so much snow,
Oh,
and
yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, it gets
almost
plenty
June.
cold.
It's
Yeah.
crazy. So
Well,
yeah,
one of the things I found was that if the temperature gets fairly cold, my hands will get numb, and then it's hard to work the controls. So I have a an electric vest that goes under my jacket and electric gloves, and those run from the motorcycle battery, and those keep me nice and warm. So I can ride really in pretty cold weather, so
yeah,
long as the road is clear of ice.
yes, that's pretty good. I mean, my Triumph has got none of that, and I've got none of it on me. But my
Hmm.
my other bike, which is a BMW F700 GS, which is 800 cc, but
Uh-huh.
nice little adventure bike, and that's got a Givy top case on. I like that.
Yeah.
Uh,
Uh-huh.
that's got electric everything, and so that's really nice. You know, it keeps your hands toasty warm, and you think, wow. And when I get back on the Triumph, and even if I've only done 10 or 15 miles, and when you can't let go, and you're like, oh, just straighten your hands out, you know.
Oh, that's for sure. Yeah. Well, yeah, you can get as an aftermarket add-on electric grips for your handlebars. And not long ago, I was riding a rented BMW, and it had electric grips, and that's the first time I've experienced those. But that worked out pretty well too. Another nice way to keep my hands warm.
Definitely, yeah. Oh, I'm all for technology.
Oh yeah.
You know, absolutely. If you need it, use it. And when did you put the Triumph to bed then this year? Is that recently?
Oh yeah. Just about 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah,
So,
we've had snowfall several times since then. There's a couple of inches of snow and ice on the roads right now. I mean, I couldn't ride it now. The road is pretty icy.
Right. When you're on these long journeys, I mean, 115,000 miles, that's 185,000 kilometers.
That's right. Yeah.
It's astonishing for our continental followers because the uniqueness of the UK, of course, we use miles as well.
Yeah. Well, that's why I've been referring to miles when we're talking now,
Oh, I
because
see.
when I'm talking to people in other places, I'll use kilometers too. I can
Ah,
switch back and forth pretty easily from one to the other.
great stuff. Yeah, it is. We are very unique in our, I think decimalization in the UK was 1969, but it's not happened yet, and it's 2024.
Yeah.
Still
Well,
a
that's certainly true in the USA. And one of the things that, as a person who is trained in science and engineering, I have thought for years and years we ought to totally switch to metric. It is so much easier. And when I go to other countries, I mean, even to Canada, all the speeds are in kilometers. And within a day, I'm thinking of kilometers, and then I have to readjust back to miles. Um, so I would much prefer the kilometer system. I think it's much
yeah.
easier to use.
It's so unusual. In the UK, we of course we refer to pints when we're
Oh,
talking
yeah.
about fluids, and we
Well,
talk about gallons of fuel, although
yeah.
it's in liters.
Well, yeah. Well, we do the same thing here.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is that when Ronald Reagan was president, I mean, he was known at the time as ultra conservative. He did everything he could to drag the country kicking and screaming into the metric age, and
Oh,
he simply couldn't overcome the resistance. Now, officially, our official measures are all metric,
right.
but everybody still uses miles and pints and so forth, and people just refuse to change.
And we're exactly the same. Yeah, exactly
Yeah,
the same. In
it
fact,
was it was good enough for Grandpa. It's good enough for me, sort of
exactly.
thing.
Exactly. Although I actually sell our diesel and petrol in liters, and so you'll buy 20 liters of fuel, but your car will say it's doing 33 miles to the gallon. So you're like,
Yeah, yeah.
what is that? 100? How many kilometers per? Oh dear.
Oh,
So
yeah.
anyway, I don't think that'll go away in my lifetime.
Oh, probably not. It's people resist change, and yeah, and it's hard. And of course, then it is certainly a cost to make a changeover. So eventually it'll happen, but it's going to take a while.
Maybe my kids may see it. Let's see.
Yeah, of course.
When you aren't riding like now, you've got this 4 or 5, 6 months gap between the sun coming out again or the snow melting.
Hmm.
How do you keep yourself occupied? And I'm going to guess it involves snow.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. The reason I live in the mountains is I live right near one of the ski resorts, and we're opening this weekend. And once we're to there, I'll be at work. I'm an instructor, and I teach snowboarding and I teach skiing. So once the season starts, I'll be on snow every day.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so it's a few weeks after the end of motorcycling and before the start of snowboarding, and then the same thing at the other end, a few weeks in between.
What a fortunate group of hobbies to have, a summer riding and a winter riding of either the snowboard or skiing. That's
Oh,
just
yeah. Well, it is a little different because in the summer it's strictly for fun and I can go on whatever schedule I want. In the wintertime, I mean, I'm employed by the resort and I have to work whether I want to or not.
oh,
And
right.
I really do because
Yeah,
I love the snowboarding, but more to the point, I love teaching.
yes.
And I really love teaching snowboarding or skiing. Very often, people who learn very fast, good natural athletes, they don't need me. They can really learn by themselves, although I can make it easier.
Yeah.
But the ones who need me as instructor are the ones for whom it's more difficult. Now, where we live, we're at high elevation, 7,000 feet, which is over 2,000 meters up. And the air is kind of thin up here. Well, if you're used to it, that's fine. But we'll get a lot of people who see snowboarding or skiing on the TV. They think it looks like fun. They're living at sea level in the San Francisco Bay Area. They don't get any exercise, so they're not in good physical shape. Then they drive up to the mountains
They've only got half
to
as much oxygen.
only half as much oxygen. And then they find out that snowboarding and skiing both are vigorous outdoor sports. That the TV doesn't show that part. The TV makes it look easy, but it's not. So many of these people really struggle to learn the most basic moves. And those are the ones that I can really help. And at the end of the day, when they've got a big grin on their face, they've learned to do something that for them was hard to do. That's really exciting. I love doing that.
I'm smiling away because it's making me recall a rather embarrassing time that I went skiing in Canada, up in Montreal and the north of Montreal in Quebec City. They've got a beautiful ski resort, which was all very oldie worldy and nice little bars and restaurants and stuff. And it was the first time I'd been skiing other than on, almost flat, just enough to get moving type stuff.
Mhm, mhm.
And I rented all the stuff because I didn't have my own stuff.
Yep.
And then I did what I always tell motorcyclists not to do: don't ride to other people's abilities. Ride to your own.
That's for sure.
So the people I was with were saying, "Come on, we'll go up here and then we'll come. It's nice, little beginner slope." And I'm literally terrified. But I thought, I can't tell them. I can't. I've got to do it. So I went up and I saw them just disappear, and they were going, "Yeah, you're only going to be about 25, 30 miles an hour. It's absolutely fine." And I'm like, that sounds really fast.
Yep. On skis, it is fast.
And it is, isn't it? 35, it's like 80 on a bike or in a car.
Hmm.
So I was
Oh,
thinking,
yeah.
so off I went. And the bit I really wasn't good at was stopping. And I thought, if I stop the way they just stopped, both my ankles are going to snap. So I was like panicking and panicking. And I got closer and closer and quicker to this small barrier, which I would have gone straight through, and this chestnut stand where he's like cooking these chestnuts, hot chestnuts, all the people with the bobble hats and the gloves enjoying it and the scarves. And I'm thinking, and I'm going faster. I think, oh, if I hit that, I'm going to kill someone, or I'm going to knock that. So everyone started looking, and you could see they were thinking, okay, any minute now. Then oh my God. And I saw the faces, and someone shouted, "Just fall over." And I was like, what? And I thought, and in the end, I just thought, I've got to throw myself on the floor. Well,
Yeah.
honestly, I just literally, it was like completely wiped out. I came to a halt about 18 inches away from this barrier, and then like all bewildered, like thinking I've not broken anything, nothing's hurting too much, and I got
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
and everyone were like almost thinking, is he alive? And then when they realized I was, and I laughed through embarrassment, they all laughed. And I was like, the last time I ever do this. So I was like, someone help me up. And I'm like, and I said, get me out of here, in a walk away as quick as you possibly can. Oh,
Yep, yep.
and you're talking about that, and I'm thinking, that was me.
For sure, yep. Well, many people have fears. They have fear of not being able to stop is a pretty common one.
Yeah,
And part of it is the fear that you sort of experienced at the end, which is they don't want to look foolish in front of everybody else. So for the beginning lesson, it's helping people to overcome those fears. And we really start out on perfectly flat snow and learn the different movements. And then little by little, we progress up. And then people get the feeling that, yes, they really can control it. And then it gets to be really fun.
yeah. Oh, I remember it being so exhilarating. And
Oh, it is. Yeah.
I guess my heart was telling me this could be amazing. My brain was telling me, get in the bar, get dried off. So yeah, so the profits went up in the restaurants and bars for a couple of days, but not the ski run.
Mhm.
So you've got your winter job and love as well. That's amazing. To do something that you love doing means you never have to work a day. That's one.
That's for sure. Yep.
That's really
Oh,
lovely.
yeah. Most mornings, even if the weather is not good, I can't wait to get out to the ski resort because I enjoy what I do so much.
That's a beautiful thing to be able to say. Not many people
Yep.
can say that.
No, I know. I think I'm very fortunate that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And then so you've ridden in all the continental USA.
All
Uh,
the continental USA, yeah, all over the USA, all
Canada.
over Canada. And I've had a fair amount of riding in other continents, other countries also.
Well, I was just about to ask that because you very briefly said, and I've also ridden overseas, and I wondered if you could tell me
Yeah.
a little bit about any of those adventures.
Oh, well, quite a few. Of course, the first one that I would call a real adventure was riding in the city of Delhi in India. And that came about. I had a business trip to Delhi when at the time I was still working for a Hewlett-Packard company. And I was looking through the Lonely Planet guidebook just for some ideas of things I might see or do while I was there. And I came across a listing for a motorcycle rental shop. And I thought, well, I've been riding some in Malaysia and in Japan, and it's gone very well. So why not? So I corresponded with the guy and had the arrangements all made before I arrived. Well, if you've never been in a big Asia city, it's kind of hard to explain exactly what it's like. Um, but I flew into Delhi on a Friday evening, and the weekend was free. I was going to go get the bike. I was going to ride to the Taj Mahal. I mean, I had all these plans for what I was going to do.
Yeah.
So get in Friday night. The airport is on the southern edge of the city. The hotel was right nearby, and the company offices were also right nearby. So that part was all pretty close together. So I got a cab to the hotel and went to sleep, keen to go get the bike on Saturday morning. Well, the bike shop was on the northwest side of the city. And this is a city of 14 million people. It was then, it's even bigger now. So I get in the cab and we start driving along, and I'm beginning to observe traffic. Pedestrians by the thousands swarming all over the streets, paying no attention to the cars. Bicycles, thousands of them, paying no attention to anybody else. Motorcycles of every size and description. You'd see a little Honda 50 with Papa on the front seat, Mama on the back seat, one kid hanging onto Papa, the other hanging onto Mama, and a piggy on the floorboard. All the way up to much bigger ones, and then a heavy mix of cars and trucks and buses. And then the animals. Every now and then an elephant would come down the street with his owner perched on top. The Brahmin cows are everywhere, and they are sacred to the Hindus. You don't dare bother them.
Yes.
So they will wander into the middle of a busy intersection and just stand there, and everybody has to go around them. The traffic lights and traffic signs seem to be considered advisory by most people. They drive on the left there, as they do in the UK, at least in theory.
Yeah.
But whenever
Actually,
they don't
drive
like
on wherever
traffic,
they want.
they'll go wherever they want. They'll go down the wrong side of the road. So I'm observing this as we're driving along in the cab, and I'm thinking, not so sure this is a good idea after all. And by the time we got to the motorcycle shop, I had decided I was going to tell the guy I've changed my mind and not do it. But he was so nice. He'd opened up on Saturday, especially because I was coming in, and he had the bike all ready for me. It was a very old Royal Enfield, and I didn't have the heart to say no.
Oh.
So I got on that thing. It had no electric start, 500 cc's, so I had to kickstart it.
Yeah.
And the clutch didn't work right, which meant that it stalled at almost every intersection, so I was having to kickstart it over and over and over again. It took me 3 hours to get back to the hotel, during which I actually had a collision with another motorcycle. It's the only time it's ever happened to me. This guy was in a hurry. He cut in front of me, and as he was cutting in front of me, he hit my front tire, nearly knocked me over. So I got back to the hotel and I parked and I said, I'm not touching that machine again. And I went into the bar and had a lot more beer than normal to calm down. The next day I took a tour bus to go to the Taj Mahal. But then the day after, it was time to go to work, and it was not far to the offices. And I looked at the bike and I figured, well, I paid for the damn thing. I guess I may as well use it. So I had brought my own helmet with me.
Yeah.
So I rode the bike to the offices. Didn't want to leave the helmet out, so I carried the helmet with me. So I walked in. The very first executive I met with, and I was meeting with some of the top executives in our India facility there, took one look at me and he says, "You're riding a motorcycle?" And I says, "Yes." And he says, "Here in India?" And I says, "Yes." And he says, "You must be very brave. In other words, you must be nuts."
Brave or stupid, yeah.
Yeah, so that I figured that was a real adventure. I had no further problems with the bike, and I did manage to get it back to the rental shop all right. But I figured an adventure is an experience that's heaps of fun after it's over.
Yeah, very true.
So that was probably my one real overseas adventure in the sense of that kind of experience. But I've been riding a fair amount in Japan, a lot in Singapore, and some in Malaysia, and also more recently in New Zealand and Australia too.
So you like driving on the proper side of the road then, on our
Oh,
side?
of course, yeah. Well, from having spent a lot of time in New Zealand over the years, for nearly 20 years, I had a car of my own in New Zealand that I kept there.
Wow.
And I put well over 100,000 kilometers on New Zealand highways, from the northern tip of North Island to the southern tip of South Island and everything in between. And also quite a bit in Australia because one of my grandsons lives near Sydney. So
Ah,
I've spent quite a bit of time there. So I'm completely adjusted to driving on the left side in Sydney and on the motorways there.
yeah.
And then lesser amounts in Japan and in India and Singapore like that.
Wow. It's interesting. The person that was the guest on my last podcast was from New Zealand.
Ah, uh-huh.
Actually born in Scotland, so he's
Mm.
British, but
Oh, yeah.
moved over to New Zealand when he was 8 years old. And then he and his girlfriend have flown to London back in May and then rode through Europe and the Central Asia.
Oh,
Uh,
what fun. Yeah.
yeah, and they sounded like they had an amazing time. So it's interesting that you spent so much time in New Zealand as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that started way back in 1999. I started going to New Zealand during the American summer for snowboarding. And before long, I decided to go through the New Zealand snowboard instructor training program. They have a very thorough program. You have to pay tuition. You're basically going to school.
All
And
right.
that program runs for the entire New Zealand winter, which is 3 months. But at the end, it qualifies you to be an instructor. And at the time I did that, I was still practicing law full time. I had no thought of getting another job. I mean, I enjoyed my legal work. I didn't want to do anything else.
Yeah.
But I got back to the USA and I figured, well, I got all that training. Maybe I should put it to use. So I applied for a weekend job at one of the ski resorts that was more or less in commuting distance from the Bay Area. And on my very first day teaching, I found that teaching snowboarding was the most personally rewarding thing I'd ever done. So then it gradually got to be more and more, and now I do it full time.
It's amazing. Where are they in the ski resorts in the South Island in New? I guess it must be. Or
Oh, yes. Well, there's one ski resort. Actually, there's more than one, but one main one on North Island, getting down more or less towards Wellington. The mountain is called Mount Ruapehu. And, the North Island is volcanic in
yes,
formation. Ruapehu is a huge volcano. The top is over 10,000 feet high, and it sticks way up above everything else. And so it catches all the weather. And the weather there can be unbelievably nasty when it wants to be, which is quite frequently. The South Island is formed by motion of tectonic plates.
yeah,
And so it is really pretty much a mountain range that's several hundred miles long. The mountain range is called the Southern Alps. Now, the highest peak in New Zealand is actually there. That's Mount Cook. There are no ski resorts right there. The ski resorts are more in the mountains, not too far from Christchurch, and then down towards the Queenstown area.
right.
And that's where I've spent most of my time.
Beautiful. Yeah, I think it's one of those places that most people who talk about going to sort of, Australasia, Australia, New Zealand, and people talk about New Zealand, they say the beauty and the variety of scenery on such a small country is astonishing.
That's very true. Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, very similar size to the UK, I think. And of course we do have down at the southwest in Cornwall, it's almost Mediterranean. Although I don't think they'll think that at the moment because it's snowing. And and
Uh-huh.
the northeast, of course, in Scotland, it's terribly freezing and the most weather that you could only have nightmares about.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. Well, one of the things I hope to do in another year or two is to come to the UK and spend a month or so cruising around the UK on a motorcycle.
Oh, there.
Now, when I was very little, my family lived in England.
Oh,
My dad was in the American Army, and this was shortly after World War II.
yeah.
And we had been stationed for a while in Germany. Then he was stationed in England. We lived in the town of Uxbridge on the western edge of London.
Yes.
And we lived there for about a year. I was 4 years old then, and I have hardly any memories of it. But just a couple of years ago, I spent a few days in London, and I took the tube all the way out to Uxbridge. And walking around, I kept having the feeling I've been here before
Wow.
without recognizing specific features, but
Yes.
I felt like this is where I used to be.
Just that
But
familiarity
that
somehow.
familiarity, definitely.
That's
But
lovely.
yeah, but I'd love to go ride through Cornwall. I'd love to go ride through Scotland. I mean, there's a lot I'd like to see there.
Yeah.
So if I do that, maybe you and I can go ride together.
Be wonderful. I was just about to say, well, you've got a friend here in England now.
I sure do,
By
yes.
all means, yeah, if you're here, I'd be very disappointed if you came to the UK and we didn't have a drink at least. So,
Well, all right. Well, we'll do that for sure.
yeah, absolutely. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So India was you had to ride because you felt you wanted to get your money's worth. Yeah. And I have ridden in some Southeast Asian countries, so in Thailand and the Philippines,
Oh,
Manila.
yeah.
But it just, unless you've been there, you can't visualize how many people are trying to get to the same place at the same time.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Well, I've heard that from other people. The conditions in Delhi are not too different from in Thailand or the Philippines or places
Yeah,
like that. Yeah.
incredible, incredible.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
but you've also, as you said, ridden in Australia, New Zealand, and then I see this wonderful picture behind you.
Yeah.
Um, where is that?
The picture behind me is a monastery called the Tiger's Nest. It's high in the mountains in Bhutan.
Wow, beautiful.
Yeah, it was last summer at the end of the summer, which is about a little over a year ago now. I was beginning to think about where I'd want to take a next motorcycle trip. And having been all over the USA and Canada, I began to think of other places. And for a while, I was thinking, I'm going to take a month or so and go cruise the Alps in Switzerland and Austria and Romania and so on. But around that time, I saw a movie that was filmed in Bhutan. And
Right.
the movie is called The Yak in the Classroom. Well, it's really a touching movie, and it's the first movie made in Bhutan that has earned international acclaim as a film.
Wow.
And so I watched the film and got really intrigued by it. And then I thought, I wonder if people ride motorcycles in Bhutan. So I went online, and before long, I found a motorcycle tour company based in Bhutan. So I corresponded with them and arranged to take a motorcycle tour through Bhutan with this company. Now,
Wow.
at first, I thought I was going to be one of the group. It
Yeah.
turned out the group size was one. So it was me plus the guide, both of us on motorcycles, and then a support driver who drove the support car, which had all our luggage and stuff in it.
Wow.
Of course, my Triumph can carry quite a lot of stuff. My Triumph would not do well on Bhutan roads. Um, basically, Bhutan, is north of India and it's just south of Tibet. So it's in the high Himalaya mountains, which are spectacularly beautiful. It was my first exposure to the Himalayas. But the mountains form a series of north-south ridges through the country. And those ridges extend from Tibet on the north down to India on the south. The ridges are often as much as 2,000 meters above the valleys below. So there is exactly one east-west highway in the entire country, and it's more or less through the middle. So the road switchbacks its way up the ridge and switchbacks down the other side across the valley and then switchbacks up the next ridge again. They drive on the left there as they do in India, and the roads are quite narrow. In the western part of the country, which is the more developed part, the road is actually 2 full lanes wide, and it's actually a sealed road. As you get towards the eastern half, the road narrows to where it's about maybe 1.5 lanes wide at most. It's just wide enough that when you're on the motorcycle, you can squeeze by a truck going the other way without hitting anything.
Yeah.
If a car meets a car opposite, they both have to sort of pull on the shoulder to get around each other.
Yeah.
And then theoretically, the road is paved, sealed all the way to the eastern end. In practice, there are quite a few places where it's under construction or being repaired. And so there's a fair amount of riding on sand and gravel. Now, of course, I was not riding my Triumph then either. The tour company provided a Royal Himalayan 400. And of course, that was a small bike, smaller than my Honda, but very well suited for those roads.
Right. And that is that the newer I know Royal Enfield have brought some new adventure bikes out, haven't they? Is the Himalayan one of
Yeah,
those?
yeah, it is. It's a very new one. It's a very comfortable bike to ride, surprisingly for one so small because it's much smaller than mine. But we would ride for the better part of the day, and I'd be quite comfortable and not get overtired or not get sore in the back or anything.
Yeah, I know they're very
Yeah.
popular. Because I don't ski. My my I guess to maintain my interest in motorcycling in winter, well, this is one of the things that I do. And I also, I research, I like to read about everything that I'm interested in. And of course, that involves reading about motorcycles. And I know that they're very, very well thought of. And I've developed quite a following. Royal Enfield are on
Mhm.
the up by the look of it.
Oh yeah, well they're getting to be fairly popular in the USA now.
Oh,
The Triumph dealer in Sacramento, where I got my bike, now has a whole section of Royal Enfields, and you see them all over the country.
yeah.
The one I was on now, on the one hand, it was easy to ride, it was comfortable, it was fun, it handled very nicely on rough roads. We also had a major mechanical failure. We started in the western end, and at the extreme eastern end, 1 kilometer from the easternmost point, I was cruising along, the engine quit suddenly. And I thought, this is not good. Something's wrong in here.
Never
Well, I
good.
tried to start it and it wouldn't start. The support driver was short behind me. He couldn't start it. And then the tour guide, who was a motorcycle mechanic and was a little further ahead, realized something was wrong because we weren't there. And he turned around and
Yeah.
came back. And he tried to start it and he couldn't start it. So a couple of hours later, after draining the fuel line and doing all the maintenance things that you could do by the side of the road, it just wouldn't run. So we loaded it into the support vehicle. Well, the next day he arranged for another one. I mean, from his home base, he has, I think, a whole fleet of these. So he arranged for another one of the same type for me to finish the trip. Subsequently, in corresponding with him, he told me that of course, when he got home, he dismantled it.
Yeah.
He found that the timing chain had broken, which is kind of what I suspected. Not only that, but the piston had been engine damaged. Basically, the engine had pretty much torn itself apart inside. So he had to completely rebuild it. And he told me he had to go to India to get the parts to fix it.
So the
I think
money
that,
he got from your tour, he spent on that fixing that.
well, perhaps so. I don't know. But I don't think that's typical of Royal Enfields. I don't think they all break down when this was still quite new. It had maybe 20,000 kilometers on it. And so it was just one of those random failures that can happen. But
It doesn't, and I know
yeah,
that I haven't had it happen on a bike, but I've had it happen on a car where the timing chain, the timing belt snapped.
yeah, yeah.
And actually, that was a Triumph, believe it or not. So that
Oh, is that right?
was a Triumph. Can't even remember what it was after the Triumph Herald, but the timing belt snapped and completely destroyed the engine because, of course, they're all the pistons and conrods and crankshafts are trying to go around, and it just
Yeah, of course. It doesn't work right. Yeah.
no.
Well, in the USA, most cars have a recommended timing belt replacement interval, which is maybe somewhere between 50 and 100,000 miles.
Yes.
But the reasoning is replace it before it breaks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do
Oh,
now. I've
yeah.
got a Volkswagen Tiguan, and that's exactly the same. I think it's every 50,000 miles or 5 years or something.
Oh,
And
yeah. Yeah.
I'll do
Yeah.
it because I can't imagine
Oh,
buying a new engine for that.
well, that's for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, but just to get back to Bhutan for a
Yeah.
moment, cruising up and down those ridges was really fun. I mean, the roads are, like I say, they're narrow. They've got a lot of sharp, twisty curves. And on the Enfield, those were easy to take. On my Triumph, I would have been struggling on some of them, and especially on the sand and gravel parts.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, the scenery is very, very beautiful, and the altitude change from top to bottom is so great that at the top, you're really almost in alpine country. And there were a few times when I was shivering cold. But then you go down to the bottom and it's subtropical. So in the space of an hour, you're going from alpine to tropical, and then in another hour back to alpine again.
Wow, that's astonishing, really. And
Yeah, it is. It's amazing contrast. And then too, once you get away from the two principal cities are Paro, where the international airport is, and Thimphu, which is the capital. And those two are both in the western end of the country. They're about an hour and a half drive apart from each other. But once you get very far away from that, it's all agricultural.
Right.
So you're seeing in the valleys, there are farms. The farms creep right up the hillsides, and they are able to make plots of farmland in terraces or in very narrow areas. And also, it seems like every farmer has a few cows.
Right.
Well, if they live anywhere near the road, they're on steep slopes, the best place for the cows to graze is on the grass right adjacent the highway. So it's quite common to be riding along and suddenly have to stop because there are half a dozen cows on the road in front of you.
My goodness. Wow.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Wow.
But then some of the buildings and the monasteries are hundreds of years old, and they are great fun to go through. Of course, the whole country is a Buddhist country,
Yeah.
and many of them take their religion very seriously. In fact, my guide certainly seemed to, because whenever we'd stop at one of the temples, he would go in and do prayers for a while.
Right. Yeah.
But then you see these gorgeous old buildings, magnificent works of art, and very interesting works of art, because many of them are in a style that we're not used to here.
Yes.
And then the picture behind me, the tiger's nest, you ride or drive only to the bottom of the mountain. Then from there, it's a foot trail, and I suppose you could take a real dirt bike up it, but that would be very hard to do, and even that wouldn't get you all the way. So you're walking up. It's about a 2.5 hour walk. And you get up to where this monastery is. It's built literally on the side of a cliff. And what to me is so amazing is you look at it, and with the trail already set, you can walk up to it. But when it was built about 300 or 400 years ago, there was no trail. And to think of someone standing at the bottom, looking up at that cliff about, maybe 2,000 feet above, and thinking, I'm going to build a monastery up there. It's really pretty amazing that they were able to do it. But that particular one, the picture is one of the most famous ones in the country. And certainly if you do go to Bhutan, it's an absolute must see. And it's right near the city of Paro, so it's not too hard to get to.
Right.
But then all over there are these fortresses dating from medieval times. And Bhutan is one country that was never colonized, although the English tried to. But it was, of course, at the time, probably not a well-defined country on the northern edge of part of India. But there were plenty of conflicts sometimes between Bhutan and Tibet. Neighbors often start fighting with each other, and that happened there too. But the English tried and were unable to conquer Bhutan. There was a museum where I read a journal written by an English officer in the mid-1800s, and said that he said in substance, he said, we English think of these Bhutan people as, kind of stupid and nothing. But he said, with their bows and arrows, they killed as many of my troops as if they had had muskets. And he was unable to subdue them, much as he tried. So Bhutan has that long history of being independent of any outside domination.
Yeah.
Now it's a constitutional monarchy today. The king, I would have loved to meet him. He's a young guy. He has a wife and a couple of small kids, and pictures of the royal family are posted everywhere in Bhutan. They all just about worship the king. And in terms of some of the things he's actually done to benefit the people, and just looking at him, he looks like such a warm and friendly person. I thought, I'd love to get to be friends with him. Well, of course, that didn't happen.
Wow.
But I found the Bhutanese people in general to be welcoming and friendly everywhere I went. The tour guide had arranged for the hotels, and he had said, I think at the start, or the brochure ahead of time said that these were 3-star hotels. Well, to me, they were what I would call 4-star hotels. They were gorgeous.
Wow.
And everywhere I was waited on just about hand and foot like royalty. The people were so friendly and so nice. And the food was very good too. Of course, a lot of it was Indian type cooking.
Yeah.
And if you like spicy food, one of their special dishes is a dish that's a mixture of chili peppers and yak cheese. And it is very delicious. It's also very spicy. And I found I could eat a little bit of it, and that was about all.
The eating's the easy bit. It's the digesting and dealing with.
Absolutely. You have to ease into that one.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
And then I was also struck by alcohol is available everywhere. Every shop, every convenience store, every place would have a little bar set up where you could go in and get a drink. And from the number of empty beer cans in the boxes outside, it was obvious that people,
Like,
many of the people there drink quite a lot. Some of the locally brewed beer was really good. They make wine there too, and I had one or two of the glasses of wine, and I didn't think it was very good at all. But I guess I'm kind of spoiled because in California we have some really good wine.
some beautiful wines, haven't you?
Oh
Wine.
yeah.
Yeah. Wow. What an adventure. What a place. I mean,
Oh, it was. I was there just over 2 weeks. Got drenched in rain a couple of times. Now, basically, there are the summer monsoon season usually starts, I guess, mid to late June. And once that happens, it rains just about every day for a couple of months. Well, I was there before the monsoon season, but even so, storms will form in the Bay of Bengal, which is many miles to the south, and then they carry northward. And so a couple of times we got drenched and just get into the hotel, hang everything up, and let it dry overnight. Um, but the weather was generally, except for that, was really quite agreeable and scenery spectacular everywhere. Um, yeah, it was an amazing trip for sure.
well, I can see how enthused you are by it. You must have really loved it. You know, it's
Oh, I should say so. Yes.
very, I mean, I have heard of people who've ridden into Bhutan when they've been visiting other countries, and I've
Hmm.
heard of people, talk about it, but or maybe they've done a world tour and they've one of these that they try and touch each country and dip into it, and that counts as being in it, but not going on a tour and spending
Yeah.
like a couple of weeks there.
Well, it's for sure. I think, there are a couple of highways into Bhutan from the south, from India. So it is possible to get there by car or by motorcycle.
Yeah.
But to just go in and out in a day, you wouldn't begin to see everything. You wouldn't see the beautiful old temples. You wouldn't see, just riding along this twisty-curvy highway, and then here's a dozen cows in front of you.
Yeah.
Um, oh, and monkeys, many times. Well, the technical term for them is not monkeys, but I think of them that way.
Right.
Just walking along the side of the road, and sometimes when you approach, they run away. Some of them just pay no attention to you. And the yaks are more in the eastern end of the country. The yak I think of as kind of like a cow, but with long black hair
Yeah.
and maybe a little bit bigger than a cow, and they have long horns, but they serve very much as cows do. They're domestic animals,
Uh,
and their cheese is really good.
Yeah, I've heard them. I think they use it for other things that like yak milk for, I think they say it's very good for the body to make soaps and things like that. Have I heard?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't remember drinking yak milk, but I sure did have the yak cheese, and that was
Yeah.
really good.
Wow.
I think anybody who's planning to go to Bhutan ought to see that movie, The Yak in the Classroom,
Yeah,
because it shows you the scenery, it shows you some of the culture when you're away from the city. Yeah, it's a terrific movie, but a wonderful country, and I enjoyed it thoroughly.
I can tell. Well,
Yeah.
I've written down the name of that movie, so because I haven't seen it, but I am going to because when somebody tells you about something and then I think you deserve to at least watch it and see what you think. So
Oh,
that's
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. Wow. Um, I think that sounds like quite a unique experience as opposed
Well,
to some of the other eggs.
yeah, I think it definitely was. Now, the tour company is called Bhutan Tusk, Tusk, Bhutan Tusk Motorcycle Tours.
Nice.
And, I'm not the first person to have taken a tour with them. The tour guide takes either individuals or small groups. He told me that he will never mix up strangers because he finds people have different speeds, different things they want to do on bikes. And
Yeah,
he said for him, that doesn't work. So
yes.
if you have a group of people who are traveling together who want to take a motorcycle tour, he'll take the group. Otherwise, he will take just one person.
Wow.
And compared to what I've seen for prices on some other motorcycle tours, this one was really quite reasonable,
Right.
and it was sure great fun.
Fantastic.
Oh
Well,
yeah.
when we've finished the podcast, then if you wouldn't mind sending me links, I'm more than happy to put that on the bottom so people can see
Oh,
that.
I will definitely. Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, definitely. That'd be great because, when you've had such a great experience, then, they deserve to be supported as well, don't they?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the only time I've taken a motorcycle tour with a professional guide. And being in a country where, of course, things are very, very different, and I wouldn't have really known where to go or what to see.
Yeah.
I think it made all the difference. It made it a wonderful experience. And
Yeah.
I have in mind now to maybe do something like that in South Africa. And Africa is one continent I've never been to. So I'd really like to, and there are motorcycle tours around South Africa and around the pre-Namib Desert and so forth. So I'm thinking maybe in a year or so I might try to do one of those
I know.
because it probably would be enormously good fun.
Yeah, beautiful. And another, a whole continent of, I don't know, 60 odd countries, and South Africa being one of the most developed, massive countries.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Amazing roads around Cape Town and Durban, and yeah, that's
Yeah, and again, because it's so very different than what I'm used to, I think I'd feel more comfortable being in a tour group or at least with a tour guide. I still have in mind I want to spend some time cruising the Alps. Well, I've been in Europe quite a bit, not on motorcycle.
yeah,
Um, I have been a little bit. I had a couple of days of motorcycling around Serbia, and also a day of riding a motorcycle around Rome in Italy. And those experiences were both really good. Well, in Europe, I'd feel perfectly comfortable staying in a hostel or a hotel or whatever. I mean, I speak some German, and so
yeah,
many people throughout Europe speak English. I would get along fine. I wouldn't feel the need to have a tour group with me. But in a place like South Africa, it's a little bit different. I think I would be more fun to do it that way.
definitely. And of course you're staying on the riding on the left again, that legacy you've got of riding on
Yeah.
the left.
Well, it's perfectly fine with me. When I go to Australia or New Zealand mostly, but other places, it takes me about a day to get into driving on the left. But then when I come back, it takes me about a day to get into driving on the right because
Yeah,
I'll come back here and I'll start driving on the left side of the road and I'll think, wait a minute, no, I can't do that.
that, yeah, that's interesting because I don't know, a couple of years ago I was in Florida and I was driving my wife's friend's car. She said you can drive, and it was I don't know, hybrid, so it was a
Oh
big
yeah.
car, and we were my son wanted to go to Cape Canaveral, wanted to go and see the launch sites and all that. I think, is it Cape Canaveral? Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah,
Anyway,
that's right, Cape Canaveral.
it's quite a rural place, of course. It's in the middle of nowhere, and they're heading out. There's a
Yep.
small town near it, and I've been driving for, I don't know, 300 miles, but for whatever reason, I turned left onto the incoming traffic, and she was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, I was in England again for a minute, because
Yep.
when you're in a lane of four lanes, it doesn't
Yes.
really matter whether you drive on the right or the left. You're just on a highway." And
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
and
Oh,
then I was
yeah.
like,
Well, one of the things I found too in making transition back and forth, at least in New Zealand and Australia, the cars that are configured for driving on the left, the turn signal lever and the windshield wiper lever are reversed.
"Yes."
And in New Zealand, you can always tell the American drivers because the car will pull up to the intersection and the wipers go on.
Yeah, I've observed that.
Now,
Yeah,
I've done that a few times myself. And then
yeah.
when I come back here, the same thing. It takes me a day or two to get used to which hand does
Starts
what.
raining and you start indicating. It's like, what on
Yeah.
earth?
Well, in that sense, of course, riding a motorcycle is easier because the controls are the same regardless of where the bike is. So
Yeah,
you don't have to reverse your hands and do different things.
definitely. Yeah, it's a lot easier to ride in different places than drive. That's for
I
sure.
think that's true, definitely. Yes.
Wow. And all these thousands of miles, and certainly even on your own bike, what about other than the being nearly knocked off in Delhi, have you had any accidents or near misses or anything?
Well, I had one that nearly ended in a horrible disaster, and this was right near where I live, in the city of Reno, which is about 30 miles, 50 kilometers away from my home. I was on the motorway at the late afternoon, and I was heading back home. I was on my Triumph, and the road is three lanes on each side at that point. I was in the left lane. There was a long truck in the center lane. While I was passing the truck, I was about halfway from the tail end of the truck to the front end when the truck driver moved into my lane. I'm sure he didn't see me. I don't think he
No.
did it on purpose. I didn't react quick enough. The truck actually hit my motorcycle. hard enough it hit at the rear view mirror, which was the extreme right-hand edge,
Yeah.
hard enough to twist the mirror around 90 degrees. Well, at that point, of course, I both hit the brakes and moved hard over to the left to get out of the way. My first reaction was anger.
Yeah.
I was so angry, I screamed insults at that driver. I'm sure he couldn't have heard me over traffic
No.
noise. So anyway, he went on past and I'm behind him. And suddenly I thought, I've just had a moving collision on the motorway with a truck and I'm still alive.
Yeah.
I could hardly believe it.
Then it was the anger turned to relief and shock, I guess, did it?
It sure did, yes. And
Yeah,
at that point, it was thank you, God, thank you, God, thank you, God, like that.
absolutely.
Yeah, that was by far the closest call I've ever had.
Well, you've been very, I mean, that you're right. That was, I don't think the fact that it just hit your mirror and you were, thank God, you were okay is wonderful. But, you might have been a second or two from not being here. So,
Well, exactly. If the collision had been a little harder or a little different, I could have been knocked under his wheels, and that would have been the end of me. And
yeah.
we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Oh, oh, wow. So, yeah, I can, I guess I've not had that happen to me, but I've had a few near misses, and I broke both my wrists once on a bike.
Mm-hmm.
And that was literally because I went over the handlebars.
Oh,
Uh,
uh-huh.
I was a left-hand bend, and there was a car parked on the left. Of course, I'm riding on the left.
Mm-hmm.
And as I'm going round the bend, I had to go round this car. So I indicated right, looked in my mirror, went round. As I went round, a guy pulled out of his drive on the right-hand
Oh,
side,
oh no.
didn't look, and he turned left into me, and I hit him head on.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Oh,
Thank God I was doing like 30 miles an hour, but that's fast enough on a bike,
oh yeah, for
you
sure.
know. And I literally went straight over the handlebars, over the car, and landed in somebody's front yard. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
didn't had no idea I'd broke my wrists, but the shock. But basically, as I went over the
Yeah.
handlebars, the front brake lever and the clutch lever had snapped them as I went over.
Oh yeah. Uh-huh.
Uh, and I remember sitting up. I momentarily lost consciousness. My helmet wasn't on. I had a full face RI helmet, which was double D, but it was
Oh,
off.
uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But thank God I didn't have a head injury. But I remember running over to the bike and trying to pick it up and couldn't understand why I couldn't pick it up
Yeah, of
because
course with
my body's saying you've broken your wrist, but my brain didn't know yet.
Brain hadn't figured that out yet.
Yeah, and the guy was
Yeah,
like, "Leave it, leave it, leave it. You're all right. Leave your bike." And I was like,
yeah.
"So that was
Well, I've had an accident, something like that, but on a bicycle.
oh,
Um, Going back over about 25 years ago now, I was on my bicycle in a hilly area right near where I lived at the time in the Bay Area. And I was just going downhill and I just applied the brakes a little too hard. And I proved that the law of physics works. The front wheel locked and it threw me over the handlebars and I came down on the pavement on my left side, wham, like that. Well, I wasn't in great pain. I knew something was wrong because I wasn't able to move the way I should have. Well, there was several people standing right nearby, and one of them says to me, "Oh, we'll have you up and riding again in a minute." And I thought, somehow I don't think so. But after a minute or so, I tried to get up and I couldn't. And I said to him, "Okay, I guess you better call the paramedics." Well, it turned out I had cracked my pelvic bone in the impact of the fall. And that cost 6 weeks on crutches and then 6 more weeks of physiotherapy to recover, but eventually full recovery. I was incredibly lucky it was the pelvic bone and not the hip joint because
yeah,
the bone was not actually dislocated. So I didn't have to have a cast or be bolted back together or anything. It was
goodness,
just
yeah.
taking it real easy for 6 weeks. But
Well,
it's not fun to have that sort of thing happen for sure.
no, no, definitely not. Certainly, when these close near misses or accidents happen, especially a near miss, that feeling of sat at the side of the road, just thinking, just coming down mentally thinking,
Yeah,
I can imagine you on that highway with that truck
yeah.
doing that. Have you got a
I,
dog
yeah,
there?
I got my dog here. He's
Well,
asking for
well, I
attention.
locked mine in the other room because on the last week's podcast, half of it was on my knee. Sorry about this.
Well, let's see if I can turn the camera a bit and you can get a view of the dog here.
Oh,
don't think I'm getting in.
Oh,
Oh yeah, there he is.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. That's nice. Wow. So what's how are we going for time, by the way, Dick? I know that you
Um, I'm showing the clock says 10 minutes to 9. No, I'm quite all right. I've got an appointment at 9:30, 40 minutes from now to get my hair cut.
oh, okay.
But that only takes about 10 minutes to get there, so I'm fine for time.
All right, brilliant. Didn't want to put you under pressure or anything else.
Oh, not at all. No, no, no. This is quite all right.
Good, thank you. So, you've been riding for how many years would you say, on and off?
Well, I started when I was 18, and that would have been 1964. Um, so yeah, at the end of my freshman year, that would have been 1964. So since 1964, so that's to 2024, that's 60 years now.
Years, yeah. And what would you say to younger people that are maybe young people or older people that have not ridden that want to get involved in riding? What advice would you give them if you could?
Well, first of all, start on a small bike. You know, you don't start out on a Rocket 3. Start out on a small bike. And the way it is now in the USA, organization called the Motorcycle Safety Foundation gives weekend courses. And they provide the motorcycle, about a 200cc one. And they teach you how to ride the bike. And the way the licensing works in most states now, if you complete their weekend course and pass, that's all you need to get your motorcycle driver license.
Right.
So I would say definitely do that. You learn how from instructors who know how to teach, and you learn the basics, you learn how to handle it. And then I think the best thing to do, I believe, is to go off-road for a while, because you'll develop the skills of really handling the motorcycle, sometimes under maybe muddy or slippery conditions, but out of traffic.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that is really key, to really be comfortable before you start venturing into traffic, because you're going to have to deal with trucks that change lanes, and you're going to have to deal with people who turn left in front of you. You've got to develop your reflexes and develop your skill in handling the bike to deal with those situations. And I think much better to do it first, when you're just in the dirt and having fun. So that's the advice I would give.
Yeah, that's really good advice. That's the first time anyone's actually said that. Honestly, people say
Really?
get a smaller bike, and in the UK, and I think most of Europe, certainly most of the European Union, which of course we're no longer a member of, but actually when when we left the EU, they said all the laws are going to change. We're going to have British laws. Well, they are,
Mhm.
but all they did is, when you go into a Word document and you say find and replace, they just replaced European Union with United Kingdom. So they're
Of
all the
course, yeah.
same law. Nothing's changed
Oh,
except the
yeah.
name. So in most of Europe, including the UK, they have a graduated scheme of riding where at
Mhm.
16 you can ride a moped up to 49cc, and then at 17 you can ride up to a 125cc, 15 horsepower maximum.
Mhm.
But you have to do a 1 day training course, which is an all-day course just to ride that. But
Mhm. Mhm.
can't carry passengers, can't go on the highway, and you've got to display a L plate front and rear to say you're a learner.
Yeah, they do the same thing in Australia.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And then at 17, 19, and 24, there's three separate tests. If you want to ride a bigger bike, with I think it's 40, someone will correct me, 44 horsepower maximum, where at the younger age, you have to do three tests. You have to do a written test, which is
Mhm.
basically go to a government approved office where you sit in a computer. It's two parts. One is hazard perception. You have to click when you see a emerging hazard, and
Mm.
you have to get a certain percentage. And the next part is basically a theory test where you ask your questions, stopping distances in the wet, in the dry, and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
What's
Mhm.
road signs mean? And you've got to get a pass rate there. If you pass that, you then have to wait several months for an appointment to go and have your part one, mod one, they call it, of
Mhm.
the riding exam, which is in a parking lot, if you like, where you've got to do a swerve test. You've got to do a braking. You can't put your foot down. You've got to maneuver the bike at speed, walking distance, etc., etc. If you
Yeah.
pass that, you make another appointment, and then you do what we would think is a proper right driving test, where you are followed by an instructor with an
Mm.
earphone in, and then just about like a car driving test, you go on about a 40-minute ride where he follows you and he says, turn left at the next junction, stop at the next roundabout and take the first right, take the third right. Then I want you to do that. And he's watching for you, your observations, your mirrors, your maneuvering, your indications, etc. Speed limit adherence. Very, very
Mhm.
complicated. And you have
Yeah,
to do that 3 times to get to 24, unless you wait till you're 24.
I see. Well, it sounds very thorough. We don't do it quite that way here. I sort of wish we did, for cars as well as for motorcycles. I believe in California, once you're 18, you can get a full motorcycle license, and the test is certainly not as thorough as you've described.
Right.
How much difference it would make in safety, it's bound to make some. And I think it
Well,
would certainly make safer drivers that way.
yes. I mean, I'm not sure about cars, but I know I researched it a couple of years ago with motorcycling. Per populace, there are, I think, 700% more people in the US die on motorcycles than in the UK. So seven
Mm.
for every one per
Wow.
population per million.
7.
So that's a lot of people unnecessarily passing away.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess I would follow your advice, and even if you didn't have to, then like you've took further tests and further instruction, I would say,
Yes, I have. Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
definitely. It's really worthwhile. Of course, those things are really fun to do. You're with other people who enjoy riding motorcycles, and you're learning neat new things you can do on your bike that you didn't think you could do before. So, of course, one of the things too that I will say, and this will apply for you, you learn to drive on the left side of the road,
Mm,
and you develop the habit of looking to your right when you start into a street for oncoming traffic. Then you go to the continent driving on the right, and it's reversed,
yeah.
which means you've got to learn to look where you're not used to looking. Where I first learned that was when I first started making business trips to Singapore, and this was before I was riding bikes in Asia. A couple of times, I nearly got creamed stepping off the sidewalk right into the front of a passing car. And after the second time, I'm thinking, what's wrong here? Are these people totally maniacs?
Or is
And
it
then
me?
I realized the problem was me, because I was so in the habit of looking, for me, looking to the left. I'd
Yeah.
look to the left and step off the curb. Well, of course, the car's on the right. And then I realized, okay, I knew I was going to be traveling a lot internationally with business. And I figured I have got to make the habit of always looking both ways. Otherwise, I'm going to get killed. And so I would carry that right on through. I think, especially on a motorcycle, force yourself, always look both directions, because the car may be coming from the direction you're not expecting.
No, absolutely. I give advice to my kids and to my wife that way because my wife is new-ish, 20 years to riding, not driving on the left. And I always
Yeah,
say, listen to me. At a red light, I see her, she's like, green light, she just goes through it. And I said, you didn't even look if there's anything coming there. And she says, well, it's green. I said, what if someone's gone through on red?
exactly. People do that. I mean, I've seen people do it.
It's like,
And yeah, you've got to look.
yeah, because it takes two people to do something wrong for an accident to happen. So you
That's
don't
right.
look
Yep.
and they go through it. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's the same with
And
mirrors.
well, yeah, it is. A long time ago in the US on television, they were running automobile safety commercials. And one of the commercials showed the screen goes completely blank for a second or two. Then it shows a tombstone. On the tombstone is written the word Joe. And you look at that for a second. Then the announcer comes in and says, here lies Joe. He was right, dead right. And I think of that. I think it doesn't matter who has the right of way,
Yeah,
especially when I'm on the motorcycle. I'm the one who loses. So be ready to give the right of way. Always look both ways, and take it easy. And if it's a blind curve, slow down. You don't know what's going to be around it.
that's great. I've never seen that TV, that advert, but I did speak to a couple of two Irish guys on a podcast a couple of weeks ago, And I said, what I've observed in modern day is that young people, not always young men and women, have this, they almost drive competitively on the road. It's as if it's a competition.
Mhm. Oh
And,
yeah, you see that here too.
and yeah, it's just like they would rather have an accident than be wrong on,
Yeah, yeah.
on principle. If you're
Hmm.
overtaking on double line, two lane road, and there's a car park there, and you
Yeah.
pull out and they're coming the other way, because they've got the right of way, they'd rather crash into you and have all the upset with the insurance, the injuries, the damage, and the bite, and whatever that might be, than just take the foot off the accelerator and wave and let you go because you started that maneuver.
Oh
It's
yeah, you always got to be ready to give the right of way whenever it comes up. Life is too short to spend it to lose it that way.
absolutely wow. So what about the
Yeah.
future then? What would you say? You've ridden probably 4 times more than I have, distance wise,
Yeah.
to some amazing
Well,
places.
I want to continue riding in the two continents where I've never been riding are Africa and South America. And I hope to be able to do some motorcycling in both of those. There are tours in both, and there are plenty of good roads in both. Of course, I'm getting to the age where I have to be a little bit careful just in terms of inevitably skills are going to deteriorate as you get older.
Yeah.
Just a few days ago, I went to a 2-hour class that was taught by the California Highway Patrol, um, oriented to senior drivers. And they really talked mostly about some of the things to be aware of and to watch for. They showed a photograph, and this was really amazing. It was this woman. She was the oldest person ever to hold a California driver's license. And she was driving her car until she was 107 years old.
Oh,
So they were saying, old age doesn't necessarily mean you have to stop,
no,
but it means you have to be conscious of different things. And of course, for each person, there does come a point where it's time to hang it up. And I'm certainly not at that point now, and I hope it doesn't come for a long time. But
no, I hope.
I also hope that when it does come, that I will recognize, and at that point, my own kids will probably tell me. So,
Dad, you're just gonna have to. Yeah, I can imagine.
yeah.
I mean, like you say, let's hope there's many, many years before that.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Yeah.
But when I always ask people this, and I know that I sent you this question just to have a think about it, and it's a difficult one. But what would they normally ask about what you would say the landscape of motorcycling would be, how you think it might change, and there's obviously the electricity bit and stuff. But what about technology? I mean, what would you say if I change that question a little bit? Is the most important or valuable bit of technology that's on bikes now that weren't in the 60s or 70s?
Oh, goodness. Now, of course, my Triumph is actually fairly primitive in that way. It doesn't have a whole lot of modern electronics on it, which I think Triumph could have done more. But just recently in Australia, I was riding a brand new BMW 1250. And that one had about every electronic device there could be. And it took me a while to figure out the switches because there's so many different things it would do.
Yeah,
Of course, the heated handle grips were really nice. One of the features that I found in Australia, both on the bike and in a rental car now, is on the speedometer right next to the indication. It will tell you what the speed limit is. The car senses the speed limits as you go along, and if you're going over the speed limit, it'll start flashing at you
yeah,
to caution you to slow down. Now, I understand that that technology is under study in the USA, and within a year or so, they may be going to require it on new American cars too. I certainly hope so. I think that's a good one.
yeah.
Um, yeah, and I think, of course, there's getting to be more and more automatic cruise controls. In my car, I have a Toyota that's 4 years old now, but it's got the radar cruise control, and it'll get radar lock on the car in front and then maintain constant separation all the way down to a very abrupt stop if it has to. And theoretically, it will steer so as to follow the car in front.
Yes.
Well, that part doesn't really work very well, and it gets confused, and it will start to steer the wrong direction. So I don't really let it steer, but just keeping that separation and the automatic stop in case something goes wrong, either front or back. I think those are really valuable. Now, I don't know if those things exist on motorcycles, but something close to it, certainly that would give you a very strong alarm, or even maybe apply the brakes if you're about to crash into something in front. I think those things are really good because inevitably, sometimes we're inattentive. It can be as simple as just your mind wanders and you start thinking about things. Or sometimes a car pulls out suddenly and you may not, the machine was going to react automatically faster than your human reaction is. So I think those are the things I'd really like to see more of.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, the first one, the automatic speed limiter, that has just, I think it was from the 1st of September, all new cars sold in the EU, the European Union, again, UK as well, have to have an automatic speed limiter on them.
Yeah, I had read that. Just I didn't know the date, but just very recently in the EU, they've required that now.
Yes. Now you can override it. It says that because, of course, there was hell to pay. Everybody was, why would I buy a 5-litre Ford, whatever, if it can only do 65? You can override it, but I guess the rider with that is that if you have an accident, that EQ, engine management unit will show that you overrode it just before your accident. So when they plug it in, the insurance company say, okay, bring it in and we'll have a look at it. They plug it in and go, oh, I'm sorry, but you overrode that.
Yeah, for sure.
That'll definitely be an element, I imagine. It would be if I was paying out for an insurance company, I'd be like, plug it in, let's see what they turned off.
Of course, yeah.
Why wouldn't you? So yeah, that is a thing here. And the car I drive for work is a Honda CRV, and that has all the radar, so it stays in lane, and it's nice. I do probably it's about a 5-hour journey to work. I don't do it every day, but I do it usually on a Sunday evening, come back on a Wednesday evening. I work near the south coast and I live up in Yorkshire, so it's a long way. And it's really good for that. It stays in lane and it's got I think it's automatic cruise control where it watches the other car and you can feel it slowing and accelerating. And it does have the braking. But the lane thing can get a little bit, like you mentioned. Sometimes I think, whoa, it's going over there and I don't need it to. So,
yeah. Well, another one that recent cars have, including mine, that is I guess a relatively simple one, but I think it's valuable, is a bright orange light on your outside rearview mirror that lights up if there's a car in your blind zone.
Yes.
I found that to be enormously helpful. And I think on motorcycles, that could be very helpful too.
Yeah. I've seen on Facebook an advert of a retrofit one that you can fit, which you basically, adhesive onto your mirror, and it does exactly that orange. And I think that is a great thing because I'd say that would be, other than speed and car drivers on the phone, then I would say that's probably one of the most, a bit like the lorry driver, the truck driver with you. If he'd had that, he probably wouldn't have turned into that lane,
I think you're right, yes.
So, yeah. And ABS, biggest thing. The first podcast I did, the guy was an ex-Air Force, British Royal Air Force airman, he retired as a sergeant major, flight sergeant. And he said, I'll never, ever ride a bike without ABS, having been saved by it a few times.
I'm sure, yeah.
And I thought, because he was on about wanting I told him about my old Triumph, which is 2001. So it's 23 years old. There's no ABS, there's nothing on it apart from three carburetors. It's got electric start, but that's your lot. And he said, I'd love to have one, but I've been saved by ABS so much I daren't ride anything that's.
Yeah, of course.
I think that's a big thing.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I know that we're getting close to the time where you're going to have your haircut. I'm very lucky that I don't have to worry about that.
Don't have to worry about that. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll have to go suffer through it. So, yeah.
It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Likewise, for sure.
Have you got any final words? Anybody that you'd like to, thank? Or I mean, you mentioned the Bhutan guy. That's amazing. Anything that you'd like to?
Oh, well, I guess I thank that first guy who gave me the ride on the back of his motorcycle.
Yeah,
How's that?
he's to blame for all this, eh?
Yep, that's right.
Okay, Dick. Thank you so much. It's been
Well, thank you. It's been a treat for me too.
good. And you keep in touch, won't you, please? And then
Oh,
when
I will for sure. Yes.
you're in the UK, yeah, it'd be an absolute pleasure. You're more than welcome to come and stay over. That'd be great.
Okay. Well, you better watch out. I'll take you up on it.
Yeah, don't you worry. I expect you to. Okay. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yep. So long now.
Bye-bye.